maybe in basar b'chalav you still could have such an issue. So that plus this is he's going to tell you it's mutter. So the other pluses are going to be that rennet is comparable to adding wood to the mixture, as it's flavorless and was dried out to the point that it couldn't be eaten as food. And another addition from a great halachic decider named the Taz was that the person adding the rennet to the cheese doesn't have kavana, he doesn't have intention to nullify anything. Rather, his kavana, his intention is to make cheese. And in addition, which Rabbi Krem said, I might not be able to apply this, but I'm going to tell you anyways, is that there's a Minchas Yitzchak who quotes a Marsham, saying that the sage's entire intention in prohibiting the nullification of a forbidden item was their concern that you might come to add such a large percentage of the forbidden item that it would no longer be nullified. If I have my pasta and I have my cholent meat and I'm allowed to put in a little bit as long as it's batel b'shishim, then maybe I'll be just a little more cholent meat, until I'm not batel anymore. However, in cheese, if you would do that, if you're trying to make cheddar and you put in too much rennet, you don't have cheddar anymore. You've ruined your cheese. You might have Parmesan, but you definitely don't have cheddar. You've ruined everything. So in that case, this idea of not nullifying a prohibited ingredient because maybe you'll add too much, that'll never happen when it comes to cheese and rennet, because you'll ruin the cheese if you do that. Pausing for a drink.
So, Rabbi, is there anybody that makes in the world that makes kosher rennet, animal rennet cheeses?
I believe there are.
There must be. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how, but it's more widely used in Europe. So
Okay.
There might be.
It would be expensive, as if kosher cheese isn't expensive enough.
So almost all the kosher cheese is microbial?
Yeah. For example, what Tuvia makes in Tillamook is using microbial rennet. And like I said at the beginning, in the United States of America, it's much more prevalent to use microbial rennet. It's cheaper, it's easier to make, rather than having to extract it from a calf. It's a little bit easier to do it. So although you still have it in some artisan cheeses, it's not that prevalent around here. And if you would have kosher calf rennet, that would be a super artisan cheese. That would be some fancy stuff. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it, but I'm sure it exists on some level somewhere. Okay, so we're going to move on to microbial rennet and talk about it as compared to calf rennet to see if there's any real difference. Let me have Steve, at the beginning of section 3, read the Shulchan Aruch.
Cheese produced by a non-Jew is forbidden because they coagulated with the abomasum of an improperly slaughtered calf, even if it is produced using vegetable sources.
That's the big line that we want over there. Even if it is produced using vegetable sources, there is a lot of rabbinic literature on using prachim, using flowers or asavim or grasses to create cheese. Microbial rennet from a different source besides a calf. And the Beis Yosef, who's the same author as the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, speaks about it at length, and at the end he brings a lot of proofs and brings in his Shulchan Aruch that even if it's from vegetable sources, it can't be used. So of course the question is going to come to mind, well, Chazal forbade the consumption of non-Jewish cheese because of the use of non-kosher animal rennet. So microbial rennet is a different thing. So is the cheese still subject to such a decree? So straightforward answer is yes. The reason being is that if you have a substance that coagulates cheese, and cheese coagulated by means of that substance has the same characteristics of cheese coagulated by a rennet, it does the exact same thing, it acts like rennet, it sounds like rennet, it does what rennet does, then really there's no difference. We're going to see acid-based cheeses are going to be different. They don't have the same power. But microbial rennet, the cheese that was from Tillamook, that looks like most was consumed, which is wonderful. I'm glad you guys ate. So the cheese from Tillamook, so that uses microbial rennet. It's still a hard block of cheese. It's a block of cheese. It's not gooey sour cream over here. It's real cheese. So microbial rennet does the exact same thing. And in the eyes of most poskim, of most halachic deciders, it was the exact same thing on a practical level. That being said, so cheese produced by non-Jews that used microbial rennet would still be subject to the laws of Gvinas Akum, meaning it wouldn't be able to be made kosher without having the supervision of mashgiach. And we are getting close to explaining what that means. as far as having mashgiach there and what the mashgiach is going to have to do. Tuvia doesn't just get to sit down and watch cheese making. He has to be involved in. He has to be directly involved in that cheese making. He's got to run around that factory all night, and I literally mean all night because it's a 24-hour production when they do it, right?
Yes.
And he has to be at that vat every 30 minutes, so there's no sleep in that night. Okay, so acid, set, or soft cheese. So we're going to move on to a topic that is the source of much debate, because although most people, most authorities hold that microbial rennet would be the same. Somebody poured me another drink. Thank you, whoever that was.
That's a great question.
So, although we said that most halachic authorities hold microbial rennet is the same as animal rennet, acid-based cheese is a different animal. So cheeses that are produced by adding acidic bacterial cultures to cheese that cause it to coagulate are a little bit different. They make curds that are softer. It's harder to separate from the whey. That's what cottage cheese is, curds and whey. The curds in cottage cheese are very soft. They're not hard like a piece of cheddar. So, and just another thing to add in is that when they do make acid-based cheeses, they use a little rennet as well, which we're going to have to talk about, because if they're using a little rennet, so maybe that's going to make more trouble. So we're going to discuss cream cheese, cottage cheese, farmer's cheese, all these cheeses that are acid-based cheeses. So, some halachic authorities maintain that the prohibition of Gvinas Akum applies even to those cheeses. Chazal made a decree, it applies across the board. Anything that's cheese, that's going to affect. Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, had a different opinion. He was asked a question about cottage cheese. And his response, he cites many opinions amongst the Rishonim, amongst the early commentaries, that there's a fundamental difference between a rennet set cheese and an acid-based cheese. That his main point is that with an acid-based cheese, if it was left out long enough, the milk would curdle without the assistance of the acid, and it would do the same thing. So it's not causing that much of a process that wouldn't happen naturally. Therefore, one could be lenient with such cheeses. Other Rishonim argue, and he brings those other Rishonim and maintain there's no difference. It's the exact same thing. Chazal made a decree of Gvinas Akum, that's going to apply, making the restriction apply across the board. And Rav Moshe also told the questioner that due to the lenient opinions, due to the fact that there are lenient opinions for acid-based cheeses, one need not make a public declaration as to what they decided to do with their cheese factory. Interesting. However, he intimates the halachic status of Gvinas Akum applies to cottage cheese as well. So from his actual wording, and from everybody that I've seen quote him, they feel that at the end he was trying to indicate that it really should apply, but there are people that you could rely upon. And it's the position of the star K, which I put here, that Gvinas Akum would apply to cottage cheese and acid-set cheeses as well. And the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chachmas Adam, who are two very large halachic achronim later commentaries, hold that even soft cheese is subject to the Gzera of Gvinas Akum. Now, the OU, the powerful and mighty OU, and most of the other kosher certifying agencies adopt the position of Rav Moshe, which is also accepted by Rabbi Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, who's another great halachic authority who lived in New York around the same time as Rav Moshe. They held that Gvinas Akum doesn't apply, now I'm on the next page, does not apply to acid-set cheese. And an on-site full-time supervision from a mashgiach is not required. And of course, again, the ingredients and the equipment used must be kosher nonetheless, and a reliable kosher symbol has to be present, but you're only going to need the mashgiach to jump in, every once in a while. On the other dairy facilities that I do and that Tuvia do, we're there once a month. We show up, we make sure everything's good, we give it a bracha. No, we don't. And we show up and we check everything out, and it's done. So if you hold that acid-based cheese is not subject to the specific halacha of Gvinas Akum, then you wouldn't need a full-time mashgiach to be there. And that's what the OU and many other agencies hold, although, like I mentioned, the Star Case says they do not hold to that. Okay. Good, it's working. Thought it broke. Fine. Like I mentioned, in modern acid-set cheeses, they use a little rennet too. So that's going to raise a question. If they're using a little rennet, so is that going to flip it back to being rennet-based cheese? So Rav Moshe, who explains the lenient opinion without wholeheartedly accepting it, rejects that for two reasons. He holds it's not going to bring it back to rennet-based cheese. One, I'm at the 1 and 2 here. So little rennet is used that it has no effect on the finished product, other than to speed up a process that would happen naturally. And two, even if the rennet plays some role in the cheese's coagulation, is a supporting role, which qualifies as a halachic concept called zev zegorim, meaning it's merely a contributing factor rather than the main cause and can be discounted. Therefore, it is not halachically significant. So, acid-based cheeses, even that use a little bit of rennet, are not going to be reverting back to rennet cheese according to the OU and the majority of kosher certification that hold of it. Discussions with professional cheesemakers like Tuvia support this distinction, as they tell us that rennet set cheese typically use 70 to 90 milliliter of rennet. Get this, 70 to 90 milliliter of rennet per 1,000 pounds. That's for the stuff that does use rennet. While acid set cheeses use 1 to 2 milliliter for 1,000 pounds of milk. So that's not very much. And when you look at what's even used in rennet-based cheeses, 1 to 2 milliliters for 1,000 pounds.
By the 70 to 90 sort of gets in the range of 5 tablespoons.
Right, and that's for 1,000 pounds, and that is the real rennet set cheese.
Yeah.
That's actual rennet set cheese. So we said that's where the davar hamaimid, the fact that since it's giving it the form, it wouldn't become batal. That's where that comes in, with the actual rennet set cheese. So based on that line of reasoning, non-Jewish companies regularly producing cottage cheese would be able to go ahead and do it as long as the mashgiach is showing up once a month, rather than every day whenever they're making it. So now, we've been talking until now. Yes, sir?
Just to clarify, Oregon Kosher and the OU are on the same...
Oregon Kosher does subcontract for the OU, and when we do OU companies, we are in line with the OU. However, if we were contracted to do a Star K company, so we would do what the Star K asked us to do. But generally, I mean,
So the
Oregon...
package of cheese you're looking at, Oregon Kosher Hechsher one...
So right now, I don't think we have any cheese that has an Oregon Kosher Hechsher, because the Tillamook factory that we do on behalf of Kehila Kosher. Because Oregon Kosher, though we have 30-something of our own companies, we also do several companies for the KUFK, the OU, the OK, the KSA, Kehila Kosher, and some others as well that I'm probably forgetting right now. Oh, there's a Star K one you do. So we do for a lot of other companies. And when it comes to our actual establishments, we make sure that we're in line with the protocols and the policies of all the major kosher organizations so that anyone across the globe would feel comfortable with eating our product. It's a nice plug. Okay. Fine. So now we've been talking about Gvinas Akum, non-Jewish cheese until
When do
now.
we get Tuvia?
Tuvia's coming. Tuvia will be here by 8:30 for sure. That's for sure. Okay, we've been talking about Gvinas Akum now. That's non-Jewish cheese. Now we're going to switch to talking about how we make that into Jewish cheese. And we don't dunk it in the mikveh. Okay, fine. So now we're going to talk about Gvinas Yisrael. Gvinas Yisrael is the opposite of Gvinas Akum. It refers to cheese produced under the supervision of a mashgiach. Flipping to next page. Okay. Let me have Lee read the Ramah at the top of the page. Thank you.
The Jew sees the cheese being produced and the milking. The cheese is permitted, and so is the custom in all of these countries.
So the Ramah, who is the Ashkenazi posek on the page of the Shulchan Aruch, states that as long as the Jew, the mashgiach in this case, sees the cheese being produced, then that cheese would be permitted. Let me have Michael read the Shach.
With regard to cheese made by a non-Jew under Jewish supervision, the Jew needs to be active in the cheese-making process, meaning to insert the piece of abu mesam into the milk.
Mm-hmm.
If the non-Jew does it, even supervised and with kosher ingredients, the cheese is forbidden.
Right, so the Shach is a little bit more intense, and we're going to talk about the difference here. So we're going to talk about making Gvinas Yisrael and how to do that, and that's going to bring us to the dispute between the Ramah and the Shach, who argue concerning what the definition of Gvinas Yisrael is. So the Ramah holds that a Jew observing the production of the cheese makes the cheese Gvinas Yisrael. So if we were just going with the Ramah, we'd sit Tuvia up next to the vat and let him watch it, and every other button and every other thing having to happen would be done by somebody else, and he would sit there with a lawn chair and watch. We'd give him a little lemonade, a book, he'll be good. Yeah, fine. That's what the Ramah would hold.
Life would be much better.
Yeah, even when the milk and coagulants are all owned by the Gentile, by the non-Jewish person, by the factory, even when the non-Jewish staff perform all the steps in the cheese production. That would be fine according to the Ramah. The Shach takes tremendous issue with that approach. And he holds that if a Gentile owns the milk and the coagulants, like in the case of most factories, and he places the coagulants into the milk, then that cheese would be Gvinas Akum. It's not enough just to have the Jew, watching. The only way to avoid Gevinas Akum, according to him, is to have the mashgiach place the coagulants into the milk, or to have the Jew own the milk, or the cheese, or even some say own the rennet. Now, most reliable kashrus agencies, the OU included, mighty and powerful OU, follow both halachic opinions and insist, meaning, well, really to say it a little bit better in the way that the Association of Kashrus Organizations put it, is we paskin, we decide like the Ramah, but we are machmir for, we try to facilitate the opinion of the shach as well. So, practically, in a factory, you're going to try to satisfy both criteria. And the OU tries to do that among with lots of other acceptable hefsherim. So they supervise all kosher cheese production and add the rennet in. Rabbi Zusha Blech, in his monumental work, which I really enjoy reading, Kosher Food Production, you should try it. It's really good. It's a great book. I got to speak to him on the phone. It was like a fanboy. I'm like, are you really Rabbi Blech? He's like, yes. What do you want? I was asking him about a product that he certified, so he probably thought I was really goofy, because I was like, you're my idol.
Some people are, he was actually here, gosh, almost 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
When Rabbi Zakaria Goldman was here, but
Which chair did he sit in?
He wasn't in this building probably at all.
Right. So in his book,
yeah, no.
he writes that some kosher agencies also require the mashgiach to add the starter culture. Reason being is because it's a coagulant. So if you have to add coagulants, you should have to add that as well. Others don't, as it doesn't have much of an effect. Kind of like we said when you add a little bit of rennet to acid-based cheese, it has very little effect. The starter culture also would produce an effect that would happen on its own if you left it that way. For example, in Tillamook, we don't add the starter culture, correct? Correct. Right. So as far as that, you have acceptable agencies on both sides of that issue, and it would still be acceptable. Because everybody is going to hold that you need to have the mashgiach supervising and watching it be added, as well as being the one to insert it. So nowadays in cheese factories, we don't really have a mashgiach come over with a big ball of rennet and throw it in. So how does it work? Okay. So in modern cheese facilities, rennet is often not added manually. It's dosed into cheese vats using an automated rennet feeder. Like I said before, practically the mashgiach is going to have to go and press those buttons and be on top of that every 30 to 45 minutes. And in addition to that, most kashrus agencies also require, next page, the mashgiach to maintain presence at the vat location so that you have physical supervision as stipulated by the Ramah, because he held you have to be there watching. So it's kind of hard to have to be there watching and also push the button, but there's ways to do it, and Tuvia will tell you the complicated matter when he gets to it. Yeah. So according to most poskim, many poskim, Jewish-owned milk, like we said, the shach's opinion, has a leniency. Jewish-owned milk is automatically Gevinas Yisrael. That's if they own the milk. Some say even if it just a Jew owns the rennet. There are very few Jewish-owned farms or cheese factories outside of Eretz Yisrael. And most cheese that we have nowadays are manufactured in non-Jewish facilities. And according to Rabbi Zalman Krems, who was just here, he's the kashrus administrator of the KVH and one of the founding fathers of Oregon Kosher. The shach's leniency of Jewish-owned cheese is not really relied upon today in mainstream kosher agencies. So, I want to put something out there that's very important here at the end. So there exists in the world today, and this is almost the main reason we made this class, so pay real big attention to these words. There exists in the world today rabbis with kosher certifications that are not reliable when it comes to the supervision of cheese production. They rely on minority unaccepted opinions that permit cheese as long as the ingredients are kosher and ignore the prohibitions of Gevinas Akum and the halachos associated with the creation of Gevinas Yisrael. It is very important to know that the cheese one purchases is under a reliable hechsher, and for a list of reliable hechshers, please see OregonKosher.org/acceptablekoshersymbols.html, or the fancy little thing you have right here. You can all take one home. You can all take some for your friends too. Yeah. So, just in summary, let me have, yes, Mike.
Does this mean like torch cake?
We're not going to talk about
I'm
it.
not allowed to name individual agencies. But if you want to talk to me about it later, then I
don't
could
see them on here.
tell you. If you want to talk about it later, I can certainly
So
tell
you're
you.
saying
I'm
this
just
is a
not
complete
allowed
list of the
to
good ones?
mention any agencies
No.
by name because I could be sued for slander. Let me, Ari, right?
Yeah.
Let me have you read the summary for me.
Okay, you got it. In earlier generations,
In order to make kosher cheese, it was necessary to use rennet from an animal that was properly slaughtered and kosher. The halacha prohibits cheese that was coagulated with non-kosher rennet or non-kosher enzymes. Natural rennet is derived from the lining of the calf's stomach. But today, microbial rennet is widely used. Even if the rennet and the starter culture are kosher, our sages have decreed that one cannot purchase cheese from a non-Jewish cheese factory due to a prohibition known as Venus Akum. In order for cheese to be kosher, a mashgiach must oversee the production and put the coagulation media into the milk. If not, the cheese would be forbidden and known as Kavinas Akum. If the mashgiach follows the instructions above, the result cheese would be Kavinas Israel and kosher.
Very good. I am going to put out some material about whey and about casein and caseinates, and I'm also going to post something about the amount of time one has to wait between hard cheese and eating meat. I wanted to get to it tonight, but I realized that the task was a little bit too great if I wanted to make sure that everybody understood the laws of Venus Akum and Venus Israel. But I will post those. The addendum that I have here is more related to what Tuvia is going to talk about. It's about controlling the kosher situation at a factory. Yes, Ari?
Well, there's some specific regulations just for regular governmental, control over the quality of cheese and stuff. Like for hard cheese, if you use rennet and it's unpasteurized, it has to sit for like 60 or 90 days or something like that. So there's probably some overlapping with making it kosher and also having it like legal.
Oh, absolutely. And the overlapping is even greater when it comes to the milk industry. That's the entire ruling of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein to allow unsupervised.
So is there a point where it's like satisfies both?
Not usually with Gvinas Akum and Gvinas Israel, because you really have to have, not with this particular halacha. Like I said, when it comes to Kollel Yisrael and Kollel Stam, they do mesh very well. When it comes to this halacha, you really have to have that mashgiach on site. But we have a very good idea when it comes to Kollel Stam and Kollel Yisrael.
For milk, for regular milk, it is. But when you start getting to acid base,
when you start getting to acid-based, also according to the OU and most of the authorities that hold that acid-based cheese doesn't need a full-time mashgiach, then yes, the same laws that govern cholov, that govern milk, are going to apply there also.
One more quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So a Jewish-owned business and everything, and Jewish-operated, it's very likely that it could be kosher and use rennet.
As long as the rennet would be calf rennet, and like I said from Rabbi Krems, it's not really widely used or done nowadays.
Right, I know it's not popular, but what I'm saying is everything was Jewish and kosher. Right. It could be done.
Technically speaking, if you had a Jewish-owned company, or even just a Jew on the milk or the Jew on the rennet, that it's sort of counterintuitive, but then the non-Jew could pour the rennet in. Whereas when the non-Jew owns it, the Jew has to pour the rennet in.
Okay. Can I have someone hit the lights?
You can have a Jewish owner and have the non-Jew pour in the rennet.
Does anybody know where the lights are? Joni's got it.
The lights are
Tuvia, I apologize. I broke this.
Can I give this to these guys?
Yeah, give it.
Can this be the moment we've all been waiting for all night?
Cheese! Right.
Here, cheese.
This is glorious.
Oops, I'm blocking it.
Glorious.
I'll take it.
Hold on a second.
With this mic?
I don't know. Is this loud enough? I'll wait till this rolls to the end and I'll get to your presentation.
Yay.
Okay.
All right, let me...
So I would like to, of course, thank Rabbi Chastain, the Rabbinic coordinator for Oregon Kosher, for elucidating the very complex and in-depth halachas in regards to how to make kosher cheese. It's a very important topic, considering that there are, as Rabbi Dov mentioned, certain rabbinical organizations, or not organizations, but really individual rabbis who had certain, sure standards, and so it's a very important topic, and I'm glad that he researched it as thoroughly as he did. I am just going to take you through a day at the Tillamook cheese factory. I am.
You have a field trip?
Beyond just being the executive director of Oregon Kosher, my claim to fame is that I am one of the mishkikim at the Tillamook cheese factory. Those of you who remember Rabbi Oppenheimer, when he was living here, he was my predecessor, so to speak. And the ultimate person who's giving hashgacha on the Tillamook cheese factory is Rabbi Simkin, who comes here. Usually, when you see him, that means that I will be going to make cheese sometime in the next few days. So if you go to the Tillamook cheese factory and you go on the factory tour, his picture is actually on the tour many years ago. But so he was he is the rabbi that is the main supervisor for this factory. So basically, I'll just take you through. Generally speaking, I get in my car about 9:30 in the evening, and I take the hour and a half ride down the Route 6, which is probably one of the scariest roads that I've ever driven on. You have all kinds of dangers and obstacles driving on that road, especially in the wintertime. But the first thing I'm going to do when I get to the cheese factory, like I would do really any factory I get to, is to check the ingredients. So the main ingredients that Rabbi Dov mentioned, there's the starter, the rennet, and the color. Starter is actually a pretty interesting thing because all the starter really is doing is sort of ripening the milk, the correct pH, certain bacteria, to get the milk ready to become cheese. So obviously there were times back in history when people made cheese without starter. Like any fermented product, whether it be cheese, wine, beer, these things, generally speaking, going back, before the times of modern day production, have natural flora and natural yeasts. In fact, like wine, different regions where certain wines became popular because the certain grapes had certain yeast on the skin of the grape. Same thing with cheese. That milk, was ready to receive rennet to become cheese. In modern production, what they found is that if you want to make a consistent product, that every time you buy Tillamook medium cheddar, it's going to have the same flavor profiles and look the same and feel the same. To have that consistency, they've identified certain bacteria that sour the milk and get the milk primed and ready for the addition of rennet. So the interesting thing is that a starter culture it's a bacteria. It's a single cell bacteria that originally came from a mother culture. Without getting too much into the science of fermentation, but a factory basically took a mother culture from a cheese production at one point and then grew that culture into a single strain bacteria into a certain starter. So one of the things that I do when I go to the Tillamook cheese factory is, first of all, is to make sure that they're using not creating starter from yesterday's cheese production, which was giving us akum. So I go and I make sure that the components of the starter are kosher, and there are a couple different components of starter. There's the actual culture itself. The culture actually needs something to. So they have a room. It's called the starter room. When you go to the Tillamook cheese factory, you can't see it from the visitor viewing windows. It's a sort of hidden room, but they have stainless steel tanks where they put in the starter culture. They're going to add some non-fat dry milk powder. And then they add nutrients because, like all good bacteria, they need food and things to excite them and get them eating to turn that into lactic acid. So that's the first thing I do is I check the starter room to check that they're using kosher starter culture and kosher non-fat dry milk powder and kosher nutrients. Next thing I'm going to do is check the rennet. So as Gary pointed out. Tillamook cheese, for the most part, all of their cheeses are made with microbial rennet except for one cheese. It's the vintage white cheddar cheese, which uses calf rennet. So Tillamook actually has, calf rennet on site at the Tillamook cheese factory. And so the things that I do is to make sure they keep the calf rennet in a certain room in a cage that's locked, and we maintain a seal on that cage. Between the white cheddar runs, and so I make sure that the rennet that's hooked into the production equipment that's getting ready to be used is going to be kosher, the kosher microbial rennet. And then the last thing is the color.